Hello, my friend. I'm truly so happy to see you here today, sharing this quiet space with me. Have you ever deeply wondered what you would actually do if you suddenly had all the wealth in the entire world? Well, actually, most people immediately dream of massive mansions, fleets of shiny luxury cars, and private islands hidden far away in the ocean. It is entirely normal to want those beautiful things, because society constantly whispers that luxury is the ultimate finish line of success. But today, we are going to walk down a very different path together. This is the profound story of a man who conquered the absolute highest peaks of his profession, earned millions of dollars, and then decided to spend it on something completely invisible. Our story begins far away from the flashing cameras and the roaring stadiums of Europe, in a tiny remote village called Bambali in the country of Senegal. This was a place that did not have paved roads, it did not have running water, and it certainly did not have electricity. It was a place where life moved slowly, entirely dictated by the rising of the sun and the harshness of the dry seasons. In this quiet village lived a very small, incredibly fast boy who possessed an absolute obsession with the game of football. Well, they did not have real leather footballs, so he and his friends would tightly wrap old rags, plastic bags, and even grapefruits just to have something to kick. He would play barefoot in the deep, burning red dust from the moment the sun came up until the sky turned completely black. But life in this beautiful remote village was also incredibly fragile and constantly surrounded by invisible dangers. When the boy was only 7 years old, a sudden, devastating tragedy struck his family completely without warning. His father fell terribly ill, suffering from a sickness that should have been easily treated with basic modern medicine. However, because the village of Bambali had absolutely no hospital, no doctors, and no medical supplies, there was simply nothing anyone could do to help him. They desperately tried to rely on traditional local medicine, but the sickness was far too strong, and time simply ran out. The boy's father tragically passed away, leaving a massive, silent hole in the heart of the struggling family. Can you even imagine the crushing, terrifying weight of losing your father simply because the nearest hospital was miles and miles away? Well, actually, that devastating loss planted a very quiet, powerful seed deep inside the young boy's grieving heart. He did not know how, and he did not know when, but he swore that he would somehow change the fate of his family and his village. As the boy grew older, his burning passion for football only became stronger, but his family strictly forbade him from playing the game. In their eyes, football was a foolish, impossible fantasy that would never put food on their dinner table. They sternly demanded that he focus entirely on working in the agricultural fields to help the family survive the harsh economic reality. His uncle and his mother were absolutely convinced that the only honorable path for him was to become a teacher, completely abandoning his childish dreams. They would literally hide his clothes and lock him inside the house just to prevent him from running to the dusty pitch to play. But attempting to stop this boy from playing football was exactly like trying to stop the heavy rain from falling to the earth. By the time he was 15 years old, he deeply realized that his dream would permanently die if he simply stayed in the village of Bambali. Well, he made a terrifying, incredibly brave decision to leave absolutely everything he knew and loved behind in the middle of the night. With the secret help of a childhood friend, he quietly packed his few meager belongings into a small bag before the sun came up. He did not have enough money for a real ticket, so he had to borrow coins just to secure a place on a crowded, dusty bus heading north. He did not tell his mother, he did not tell his uncle, and he did not even say a proper goodbye to his home. He simply climbed onto that bus, terrified but entirely determined, and stared out the window as his entire childhood slowly faded into the dust. The long, exhausting journey finally brought him to the massive, overwhelming capital city of Dakar, a place completely alien to a boy from a quiet village. I mean, the sheer noise, the endless concrete, and the chaotic traffic of the massive city were incredibly intimidating to a teenager who was completely alone. But he carried a singular, burning focus in his heart that protected him from the overwhelming fear of the unknown city streets. He eventually found his way to a famous local football academy that was holding open trials for young, hopeful players from across the country. Well, when he finally stepped onto the pitch for his trial, his appearance was so incredibly poor that the older scouts literally laughed out loud. His football shorts were completely torn, and his boots were so badly destroyed that they were literally held together by pieces of scrap wire. One of the veteran scouts looked at his wired, broken boots and mockingly asked him how he ever expected to play football looking like an absolute beggar. You know, the young boy did not get angry, he did not shout back, and he did not let the cruel humiliation break his spirit. He simply looked the scout directly in the eye and quietly said, "Just let me play, and I will show you what I can do." The moment the referee blew the whistle and the trial began, the laughter on the sidelines immediately completely vanished into thin air. I mean, he played with an explosive, terrifying speed and a raw, magical talent that nobody on that pitch had ever witnessed before. He destroyed the opposing defenders with ease, completely dominating the entire game, despite wearing shoes that were literally falling apart on his feet. When the grueling match was finally over, the very same scout who had mocked him rushed over to him completely out of breath. Well, actually, the scout was so entirely stunned by the boy's magical performance that he immediately demanded he join the academy on the spot. The boy with the wired boots had successfully forced the massive, heavy door of professional football to crack open just a few precious inches. It was only then, after securing his place at the academy in Dakar, that he finally gathered the courage to call his worried family back in Bambali. You know, they had been frantically searching for him for days, entirely terrified that something horrible had happened to him on the dangerous roads. When he told them he was in the capital city to play football, his mother wept through the phone line, begging him to return. But he gently, firmly refused to go backward, promising his mother that this incredibly risky path would one day save their entire family from poverty. I mean, realizing his absolute, unbreakable determination, his family finally surrendered to his dream, pooling what little money they had left to support him from afar. For the very first time in his life, he was officially a footballer, completely dedicated to mastering his craft in the dusty capital. After years of brilliant performances in Dakar, a network of international scouts identified his raw talent and offered him a miraculous ticket to Europe. Well, he boarded a massive airplane heading for the city of Metz in France, carrying absolutely nothing but a tiny bag and his massive dreams. He left the blistering, humid heat of Senegal behind and suddenly found himself stepping out into the freezing, bone-chilling winter of the French Republic. The culture shock was entirely overwhelming. The food was completely different. The language was difficult, and the freezing cold pierced directly through his thin clothes. You know, he had never even experienced winter before, and suddenly he was expected to perform at the highest professional level on fields covered entirely in ice and snow. But the physical cold was absolutely nothing compared to the intense, terrifying pressure he placed squarely on his own young shoulders. Shortly after arriving in France, he suffered a severe, incredibly painful injury to his core muscles that made simply walking an agonizing challenge. I mean, he was so terrified that the European club would cancel his contract and send him back to Africa in failure that he made a desperate choice. He completely hid the devastating injury from the medical staff, secretly swallowing his intense pain and continuing to train as if nothing was wrong. Every single time he kicked the ball, sharp, agonizing pain shot through his entire body, but he refused to show weakness to the European coaches. Well, actually, he pushed his broken body to the absolute limit for months, entirely driven by the haunting memory of his father's passing in the village. He knew that if he failed in France, the dream of saving his family and building a hospital for Bambali would permanently die. Eventually, the hidden injury became so incredibly severe that he physically collapsed, and the medical team discovered the terrible secret he had been hiding. You know, instead of tearing up his contract, the club realized the massive heart and determination of the boy, and they immediately paid for his necessary surgery. When he finally woke up from the operation, he wept tears of absolute relief, knowing his European journey was not over yet. Once his body fully healed, his undeniable, terrifying talent simply exploded onto the professional stage, completely overwhelming the French lower leagues. I mean, his blistering pace and clinical finishing quickly caught the attention of Red Bull Salzburg in Austria, who purchased his contract and brought him to the top division. In Austria, the quiet village boy finally evolved into a lethal, completely unstoppable professional striker, scoring magnificent goals week after week. His dominant, magical performances in Austria echoed all the way across the ocean, reaching the demanding, incredibly fast-paced world of the English Premier League. Well, Southampton boldly paid a massive transfer fee to bring him to England, officially making him one of the most exciting young talents in global football. The barefoot boy who used to kick grapefruits in the red dust was now stepping onto the most famous, prestigious pitches in the entire world. In England, he did not just survive the incredible physical demands of the league. He absolutely shattered historical records with his terrifying speed. You know, in a match against Aston Villa, he incredibly scored 3 beautiful goals in just 2 minutes and 56 seconds, breaking the record for the fastest hat-trick in Premier League history. The entire footballing world suddenly stood up in complete shock, desperate to know the story of the quiet, smiling boy from Senegal. The historic heights he reached at Southampton made it entirely inevitable that one of the massive, legendary global clubs would eventually come calling for his signature. I mean, in the summer of 2016, the mighty Liverpool Football Club arrived, breaking their transfer records to bring the Senegalese star to Anfield. He had finally reached the absolute highest mountain peak in the sport, but his true, incredible legacy was only just beginning to unfold. He would go on to win the Champions League, conquer the Premier League, and lift the African Cup of Nations for his beloved country. Well, actually, millions of dollars began pouring into his bank accounts, offering him the chance to live like an absolute king. But you know, my friend, when you have lived through the heartbreaking silence of losing a father to poverty, shiny gold trophies are never enough to satisfy your soul. When he finally arrived in Liverpool, his weekly salary instantly skyrocketed to levels that most ordinary people cannot even begin to comprehend. I mean, he was suddenly completely surrounded by the extreme, blinding wealth of the modern footballing world, where young players routinely purchase private jets and massive mansions. Well, actually, this is the exact moment in the story where almost everyone forgets where they came from, completely blinded by the glittering lights of luxury. But you know, he remained entirely, stubbornly immune to the intoxicating poison of extreme wealth. There is a very famous photograph taken of him walking into the stadium before a massive Premier League match, carrying his personal mobile phone in his hand. The screen of his phone was completely shattered, heavily cracked across the glass, despite the fact that he was earning millions of dollars every single month. The media completely lost their minds when they saw this, furiously questioning why a global superstar would walk around with a broken telephone. I mean, they simply could not understand why he wouldn't just buy 100 brand new phones, or hire someone to carry a golden telephone for him. When the reporters finally asked him about it, his quiet, entirely sincere response absolutely shocked the entire sporting world to its core. He looked directly at the cameras and calmly asked, "Why would I want 10 Ferraris, 20 diamond watches, or 2 private planes?" Well, he explained that those shiny, expensive objects would do absolutely nothing for him, and they would certainly do nothing for the world. He reminded them that he had survived extreme hunger, he had worked in the dusty fields, and he had played football with absolutely no shoes on his feet. He quietly declared that he did not need to display extreme wealth just to feel important or successful in the eyes of strangers. You know, he simply wanted to use the immense financial gifts that football had given him to help his people experience a tiny fraction of the beauty of life. I mean, he was essentially taking the massive, greedy machinery of modern football and completely rewriting its ultimate purpose. On the pitch at Anfield, his terrifying speed and incredible unselfish work rate transformed Liverpool into an absolute, unstoppable European juggernaut. He formed one of the most lethal, devastating attacking trios in the history of the sport, completely destroying defensive lines week after exhausting week. Well, actually, he played the beautiful game with a permanent, joyful smile on his face, radiating a deep, quiet gratitude for every single moment he spent on the grass. In 2019, the ultimate club dream finally, beautifully materialized when Liverpool captured the massive, gleaming Champions League trophy in Madrid. The barefoot boy who had to borrow coins just to escape his dusty village was now officially a champion of all of Europe. You know, he scored crucial, breathtaking goals throughout the tournament, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest African players to ever touch a football. The following year, he helped violently shatter a 30-year curse, leading Liverpool to the incredibly elusive Premier League title. I mean, the entire city of Liverpool practically worshipped the ground he walked on, endlessly singing his name in the pubs and the crowded stadium stands. But as beautiful as the European glory was, his absolute greatest, most emotionally agonizing triumph was still waiting for him back on his home continent. In 2022, the Africa Cup of Nations tournament was held in the incredibly humid, demanding climate of Cameroon. He carried the heavy, suffocating expectations of the entire Senegalese nation squarely on his shoulders, entirely desperate to bring them their first ever continental trophy. Well, he bravely battled through severe head injuries, total physical exhaustion, and brutal, punishing tackles to drag his country all the way to the grand final. The incredibly tense final match against Egypt went all the way to a terrifying, nerve-wracking penalty shootout in the heavy, warm night. You know, he had actually missed a crucial penalty earlier in the exact same game, bringing the crushing weight of past failures entirely crashing down upon his mind. But when it was time to take the final, decisive kick to win the entire tournament, he calmly, coldly stepped right back up to the spot. He struck the ball with a terrifying, absolute ferocity, sending it smashing into the back of the net to win the African Cup of Nations for Senegal. I mean, the entire country violently erupted into tears and endless celebrations, flooding the capital streets in a sea of pure, unadulterated joy. The boy who was once strictly forbidden from playing the game was now the undisputed, eternal hero of his entire nation. But my friend, the trophies and the glorious medals are merely the prologue to the true, profound masterpiece of his incredible life. While the entire world was loudly celebrating his footballing genius, he quietly, determinedly turned his eyes back to the dusty red roads of Bambali. Well, actually, it was finally time to execute the silent promise he had made to his father on that terrible, tragic night so many years ago. He took a massive, staggering portion of his own personal wealth and completely funded the rapid construction of a state-of-the-art public hospital in his home village. You know, he absolutely refused to let another child in Bambali experience the crushing, agonizing pain of losing a parent simply because there was no medical care. He built it from the ground up, entirely ensuring that it was fully equipped with modern medicine, clean beds, and actual functioning emergency rooms. This beautiful, gleaming hospital did not just serve his tiny village. It became a massive, glowing beacon of hope for dozens of surrounding rural towns in the region. I mean, heavily pregnant mothers could finally give birth safely, and terrible sudden sicknesses were no longer an absolute, terrifying death sentence for the local farmers. By building this sanctuary of healing, he literally reached his hands back through time and healed the very wound that had broken his own childhood. But he did not stop with the hospital, because he deeply understood that true, lasting freedom for his people could only come through proper education. Well, he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to construct a massive, beautiful public high school right in the center of the village. He wanted the young children of Bambali to have the quiet privilege of dreaming about becoming doctors, engineers, and teachers without having to run away in the night. He entirely furnished the school with brand new modern laptop computers, completely connecting these isolated rural children to the vast, endless knowledge of the global internet. You know, he even established a special financial award for the absolute best-performing students in the school, personally giving them funds to continue their higher education. I mean, he was systematically, deliberately destroying the deep roots of poverty that had trapped his family for generations. He then looked at the severe isolation of the village and decided to pull Bambali entirely into the modern, connected world. He fully funded and built a brand new public post office, allowing the villagers to easily send and receive vital goods and communicate with the outside world. Well, actually, he simply refused to let his people remain forgotten, hidden away in the deep dust, while the rest of the world rapidly moved forward. To ensure the new laptops and the post office worked perfectly, he financed the installation of a massive 4G telecommunications tower right in the village. You know, the very same boy who once had to borrow coins to take a dusty bus was now providing high-speed internet to thousands of rural people. He was completely erasing the heavy, suffocating silence of poverty, allowing the voices of Bambali to finally be heard loud and clear. He continued his relentless, beautiful crusade of giving by building a modern petrol station to support the local transport and agricultural machinery. I mean, he was not just handing out temporary, fleeting charity. He was deliberately building a permanent, self-sustaining microeconomy for his entire community. He practically functioned as an independent government, entirely rebuilding the infrastructure of a forgotten town with the massive wages he earned from kicking a leather ball. But perhaps the most incredibly moving, quiet act of his generosity is the monthly stipend that he personally established for the families in his region. Well, he organized a system to directly provide €70 every single month to every family in his incredibly impoverished neighborhood. You know, in a place where the daily wage is often less than a few dollars, that quiet, steady envelope literally means the difference between starving and surviving. He also continuously ships massive boxes of brand new sportswear, pristine football boots, and clean equipment to the local children. I mean, he specifically remembers the brutal humiliation of standing on a pitch with torn, wired boots while the older men laughed at him. He is absolutely determined to ensure that the next generation of dreamers in Senegal can step onto the grass with complete dignity and pride. And despite all this incredible, world-changing philanthropy, he remains one of the absolute most humble, quiet men to ever walk the earth. There was once a viral video that leaked online, completely by accident, showing him thoroughly cleaning the public washrooms in Liverpool entirely by himself. Well, actually, he had just scored a crucial, massive goal in a Premier League match mere hours before, but he still grabbed a mop and a bucket to quietly serve others. He absolutely hates the flashing cameras. He despises the celebrity gossip, and he constantly tries to hide his massive charitable donations from the global press. You know, he does not build these incredible hospitals and schools for the fleeting applause of the media or to desperately boost his commercial brand. He does it strictly because his heart completely breaks when he remembers the heavy, agonizing pain of the people he left behind in the dust. The story of Sadio Mané is genuinely not just a story about raw talent, terrifying speed, or magical historic goals in the Champions League. It is a profound, incredibly vital lesson about what true, lasting greatness actually looks like, when you completely strip away the illusion of extreme luxury. I mean, he proved that a man's ultimate worth is never measured by the shiny cars in his garage, but by the heavy burdens he lifts from the shoulders of others. He absorbed all the dark trauma of his childhood, the brutal poverty, and the agonizing loss of his father, and he slowly converted it into a quiet, unstoppable light. Well, he simply refused to let the harsh cruelty of the world make him bitter or greedy when he finally reached the highest mountain peak. You know, he built a paradise in the exact same dust where his heart was once entirely broken. And one more truly important thing, my friend, as we end our quiet journey today. Whatever heavy, invisible burden you are quietly carrying today, and whatever completely impossible goal you are desperately chasing in the dark, remember the barefoot boy from Bambali. Keep walking forward, keep working incredibly hard, and when you finally win, remember to reach back and help the others. Take great care of yourself out there in the world, and when the dark night finally falls, always come back here.